There's been several Tennessee football players who have had really, really good off seasons so far, but which Tennessee Vols stock has risen the most since the end of last football season? My answer is not one that you're probably going to agree with, so stay tuned. It's a Tuesday, Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, good Tuesday morning, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Vols. Couldn't be happier to have you along for the ride, making Locked On Vols your first listen today and every day. Shout out everydayers for making this your number one stop in your morning routine. We'll get into your mailbag questions in segments 2 and 3, specifically one in particular, asking who the top 5 wide receivers are in Tennessee football history since the year 2010. That's a fun segment we'll get into in segment 2, your questions in segment 3, and then, of course, the players who have seen their stock rise the most since the year since the season 2010. That's coming up here in today's Locked On Vols. You can watch us, listen to us, subscribe to us, download us, all that for free wherever you get your podcasts. It is your number one stop in your morning routine, and you can always find us at _Caner and at Locked On Vols. Okay, so I stole this segment from Zach Blackerby, who is over the college channel for Locked On. Of course, he does Locked On Auburn, and I saw him tweet it out, and I thought it was a really, really good topic, so I bookmarked it one day last week, and I'm like, I'm going to hit on this next week. His topic was, which Auburn Tiger has seen their stock rise the most since football season ended? So let's take out Auburn Tiger, put in Tennessee Vol. Which Tennessee Volunteer has seen their stock rise the most since the end of last year? Several guys we've talked about repeatedly on this show since spring football, and some guys who have been standing out in the weight room and all that. Sorry, my dog is making noise in the other room. That's why I had to pause to see what he was getting into. But the name that instantly jumped out to me when I read that and when I put Tennessee Volunteer in there is probably a guy, and he's a guy that I've mentioned a ton, but probably not the one that you're going to be thinking of first. The number one player that I think stock has risen the most for Tennessee since the end of last year is wide receiver Dont'e Thornton. And again, I'm on that hype train. You guys know I was on that hype train coming into last season. I thought that this guy was going to be an NFL talent. Still think he's going to be an NFL talent. But last year I thought the plan was come in here, ball out, go to the NFL. Obviously, that did not happen for Dont'e Thornton in year one in this system with Josh Heupel. It never really worked out in the slot, and I understand them wanting to put him in the slot because the slot receiver is what makes this offense go. But that just didn't work. And then finally, when they bumped him outside, it was starting to come together for him. But of course, he got hurt on his best play of the year, the adjustment and the touchdown catch at Missouri. But of course, he got hurt on that play and missed the rest of the year. So it was unfortunate because he was starting to come around a little bit. But overall, year number one for Dont'e Thornton was disappointing. It was a bust, if you will. Knowing that he was a deep threat at Oregon, knowing that he did a little bit, but not an awful lot at Oregon, but thinking that it would truly open up in this offense, it just wasn't the case in year number one. However, this offseason, he does not enter the transfer portal. The second window comes around, he does not enter the transfer portal. He's balling out. He's carrying himself as a true wide receiver one in this offense that has so many different options. Brew McCoy's going to be back and healthy. Squirrel White, of course, is there. You brought in seemingly your replacement in Chris Brazzell from Tulane, who came in, sure, at a mid-level, mid-major, but his production was unparalleled compared to that of Dont'e Thornton from the year prior. And when you bring in Chris Brazzell from the transfer portal, it's almost like, okay, we are replacing Dont'e Thornton. But Dont'e Thornton, I'm not saying that's what the coaching staff did, but from the outside looking in, that's kind of what it looks like, right? Dont'e Thornton carried himself as the wide receiver number one this spring, had a fantastic spring, practiced more, was in scrimmages more, really did a nice job. And I think a lot of that, and Josh Heupel made mention of this, I believe it was after the orange and white game, last year in spring and in fall camp, he wasn't out there an awful lot. He was hurt, he was injured, missed a whole lot of reps, and then, of course, that natural progression in this system, really in any system, but especially in this system, from year one to year two. And this offseason, Dont'e Thornton's had just a phenomenal couple of months. So the number one player that jumped to my mind was Dont'e Thornton in this conversation. Now, hit this topic on the VolQuest podcast on Tuesday as well. I brought it onto that podcast because I wanted to get some thoughts of Brent Hubbs and Grant Ramey and Rob Lewis and the cast and crew that were on the show here today. And Brent Hubbs brought up Bryson Eason Jeremiah Telander, and Sham on the offensive line. And I agree with those. I mean, Bryson Eason, you continue to hear just great things about him, about how he had arguably the best spring of anybody over the last couple of months, about how he's a true NFL talent, and his progression, kind of where he got to where he is today, is so unique, man. He was a part of the class of 2020 in the Whitehaven trio, coming over with Tamarian McDonald, who has left the program since, and of course, Martavis French, who didn't last here. He was a linebacker in high school, moved to defensive end. They just kept on moving him inside, and he's right around a shade under 300, super athletic. And he's told us in the media, like, hey, I was hesitant at first, but I have completely bought into Rodney Gardner. I've gotten so much better working with him the last couple of years. I can't imagine. This is him like last fall when kind of hinting that he was going to come back and play again. He was like, I can't imagine how much better I'm going to be this time next year by spending another year with Rodney Gardner. And that type of mindset, coupled with hard work, obviously training, and then with some natural athletic ability, Bryson Eason's going to be potentially, outside of James Pierce, kind of that star on the defensive line, and you would love for him to be that because you need a star on the interior, in my opinion. So I completely agree with Bryson Eason being in this conversation. Jeremiah Telander was a guy that's had a lot of headlines in spring practice, a guy that has really gotten along with William Inge, the new linebackers coach, really, really well. Jeremiah Telander, he is a coach's son. He's a student of the game. And, I think that really kind of clicks with William Inge. And he's going to be a guy, along with Aaron Carter, who was unable to participate this spring, but is going to be, if not a starter, just a key guy in that four-man rotation. Of course, Keenan Peely, and then probably Caleb Perry for right now. Jeremiah Telander is going to play an awful lot of football this year for Tennessee. And he had a really, really good spring. So those are and Sham, of course, Sham on the offensive line might be your starting left guard. I don't think that he was one that took a ginormous step forward this spring, but he got tons of reps playing that guard position, and he's a name that is very much in the conversation, along with Dane Davis, who's your swing man, and Andre Carrick and Jackson Lampley, to be a starting guard for Tennessee. That's talking about ceilings and floors. We'll get into that here in a moment in the mailbag portion of the show, because a lot of you guys had some responses to what I said yesterday. Sure, you need a starter at left guard, but you have Sham, you have Jackson Lampley, you have Andre Carrick, you have Dane Davis. Outside of Sham, all those guys have played and started multiple games here at Tennessee. So it's not like you don't have any options. That just kind of goes to show you where this program is right now compared to where it was a couple years ago. So Sham could be in this conversation. If you want to talk about some freshmen, probably Boo Carter. Boo Carter knew he was a playmaker coming in, knew that he was a guy that liked to do things with the ball in his hands. Of course, he's playing defense, playing that star position, the nickelback spot, a little bit of safety, and he's going to be a return man, punt return, and probably kick return. He had a really, really good spring. And then everybody was talking about Mike Matthews and how he scored a touchdown in every single spring scrimmage, and of course the Orange and White game this year. So it's a crowded wide receiver room, and I do think Mike Matthews will play some. Of course, I think Squirrel White and Brew McCoy are going to play. I think Dont'e Thornton's going to play. And Chris Brazel's got to play because they just brought him in. Competition weeds out the weak. And none of these guys are backing down right now. So I just think that's a really, really great problem to have, and we'll see kind of what that rotation is on the outside at wide receiver this year, if it's going to be more than just your standard three. They played more than 3 last year, but they were forced to due to injury. They played 4 in 2022 because Ramel Keaton had to step in for Cedric Tillman. I'm intrigued to see what that wide receiver room looks like. But because Dont'e Thornton has said, hey, I'm not going to back down. I'm going to embrace the competition. I'm going to embrace the guy in Chris Brazel that they came in to essentially take my spot. I'm going to get better. And that's what he's done this offseason. So for me, in terms of stock up, your stock has been risen. Dont'e Thornton, the first name that came to my mind. We'd love to hear from you. What player do you think stock has risen the most since the end of last football season? We'd love to hear your thoughts. My answer is Dont'e Thornton. Probably not a popular answer, but that is my answer. And I would love to hear yours at _Caner and at Locked On Vols. Hey, when we come back, we're going to get into a specific mailbag question, asking about some of the best wide receivers that have been here since the year 2010. That is coming up next as we continue on here on a Tuesday, Locked On Vols. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for you, your team, faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just like any other job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to a new and perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not using LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. At LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours, where you can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn Jobs. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So what are you waiting for? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions, well, they do apply. Okay, so I'll open up the mailbag this week. I want to take some of your questions and some of your concerns and thoughts on literally anything. And I got this question from Matt. And it's a really, really good question. It made me think a little bit. And so the more I did some research and kind of looked at who I would include in this list, the more I'm like, well, I'm going to make a segment out of this. Matt says, for Twitter Tuesday, who were your top 5 wide receivers at Tennessee since the year 2010? Immediately, Justin Hunter comes to mind. Justin Hunter's going to be on this list for sure, right? Because he was so good for Tennessee and was an early round draft pick for the Tennessee Titans. Sure, it didn't work out, but that year, 2012, though the defense was just horrendous for Tennessee, that offense was a whole lot of fun. And, of course, Justin Hunter was a massive, massive part of that. So Justin Hunter immediately was the first name I thought of. I'm like, okay, well, Jalin Hyatt's got to be in there, right? I mean, sure, throughout his career, it wasn't the best, career at Tennessee, but that single season, you won the Biletnikoff. You had over 1,200 yards receiving. You scored 15 touchdowns on only 67 receptions. Again, you won the Biletnikoff Award. So Jalin Hyatt has got to be on there. And of course, he burst on the scene in 2020 as a true freshman. That 2020 season, more on that in a moment, but it was abysmal. And so I think the wide receivers were really hurt by a horrendous offense, bad scheme, and a bad quarterback, to be honest with you. But he was a bright spot in that horrendous year for Tennessee in 2020. Took a step back in 2021, as we know, but then came back, didn't transfer, didn't leave, worked, and turned into a third-round draft pick that next year after winning the Biletnikoff. So Jalin Hyatt's going to be on that list for me as well. So then I started thinking, okay, well, Jauan Jennings comes to mind. Cedric Tillman, Josh Palmer, Josh Malone, Cordell Patterson was here for 1 year, and that was a whole lot of fun. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to go and do some research here and look at some of these receiver stats in Tennessee history. And these names I'm going to mention, of course, I've already gave you 2 of them, Justin Hunter and Jalin Hyatt. These 3 next names just continue to show up in the top 10 here, receptions, receiving yards, yards per catch, touchdowns per game, all that type of stuff through their careers. And so I could not put them on this list. Jalin Hyatt's on this list. Justin Hunter's on this list. Jauan Jennings is going to be on this list. And he has turned in a really, really nice professional career. He's got that dog in him, right? He brings so much more to your offense than going and catching balls and scoring touchdown, though he did catch a touchdown pass and throw a touchdown pass in this year's Super Bowl. And if the 49ers would have hung on to win, well, Jauan Jennings would have been the Super Bowl MVP, and that would have been really, really awesome. So he's had an awesome NFL career so far, and I'm really happy to see that. But he's not the guy that's going to be like, all right, well, I'm going to lead my team in receptions. I'm going to lead my team in receiving touchdowns. It's third and Jauan, essentially. That's his role. He does the grunt work. But, and of course, I remember him playing here at Tennessee. It was not that long ago. He was really, really good for Tennessee in that offense in 2019, playing in the slot. He had the Hail Mary catch from Josh Dobbs to beat Georgia in 2016. He had the infamous Instagram live video a week of Vanderbilt in 2017. I mean, the career is well chronicled, right? But when I looked at the career touchdown receptions, Jauan Jennings is on that list. Let's see here. Jauan Jennings is tied for 5th with 18. When I look at career receptions, Jauan Jennings is on that list at 4. Receiving yards, 2,153 yards, 4th all time. When I look at receptions, Jauan Jennings is on that list at number 5. I mean, Jauan Jennings is a, consistent top 10 wide receiver in program history. And not that I wasn't going to put Jauan Jennings on this list, but he was going to be towards the end or an afterthought. But I'm like, man, after seeing this, Jauan Jennings has got to be on this list. So Jauan Jennings is on this list. Remember, we're going through from year 2010 on. Not history of the program, just from 2010. So we got Jalin Hyatt. In no particular order right now. We got Jalin Hyatt, Justin Hunter, Jauan Jennings. The last two are intriguing. Because, again, you've got Josh Malone, you got Josh Palmer, you got Denarius Moore, the tail end. He technically played in 2010, so I'm counting him in this conversation, but he was here in like 2007, 2008, 2009, and 2010. Cordell Patterson was here for 1 year, and though it was amazing, if you look at his stats, it had a little bit of rushing, returning, receiving. He was doing what he does in the NFL right now, not just strictly a wide receiver. So Cordell Patterson doesn't make my list. But I've got all these names, but again, 2 more names just continue to show up on these lists. And I didn't want to put Cedric Tillman on this list because I thought it was recency bias. True story. I did. However, Cedric Tillman shows up in a lot of these top 10 lists. You look at single season receptions, Cedric Tillman shows up at number 8 or number 9. Cedric Tillman was thrown his way 17 times against Pittsburgh in 2022. Receiving yards, Cedric Tillman was 5th in program history with 1,081 back in 2021. Cedric Tillman had 200 receiving yards against Georgia in 2022. Cedric Tillman had 17 career touchdowns. That ranks tied for 9th in program history. Cedric Tillman had 12 receiving touchdowns, tied for 3rd in a single season. That was back in 2021. He had 3 total touchdowns against Purdue in the Music City Bowl in 2021. That is tied for 2nd in single game receiving touchdowns. The more and more I tried to keep Cedric Tillman off this list, again, 2010 to now, it was tougher and tougher to do. I was like, okay, well, that's just recency bias. I don't need to put Cedric Tillman on this list, but clearly, Cedric Tillman has been one of the best wide receivers, one of the best 5 wide receivers that have been here since the year 2010. So I'm like, okay. Excuse me. Cedric Tillman is on that list. So let's walk through this again. Jalin Hyatt, Justin Hunter, Jauan Jennings, Cedric Tillman, in no particular order. And then the last one, again, I tried not to put him on this list, not because he wasn't talented, not because of how it ended here at Tennessee, but I just didn't think that he qualified because he didn't play all 4 years here. Derrick Rogers is going to be on this list. Again, you go back through and look at some of these wide receiver stats in program history. You've got Derrick Rogers that comes in the single season reception marker. He had 67. That's tied for 7th with Jalin Hyatt. That was back in 2011. Derrick Rogers also shows up in single season receiving yards. He is 8th with 1,040 back in 2011. He's got one of the highest single game receiving yards records in Tennessee history as well, kind of in that top 10. Receiving touchdowns in a single season, Derrick Rogers is tied for 9th with 9. And so, as much as I tried to leave him off, there's no reason why I should have. You look at the stats don't lie. Derrick Rogers, though, he only played here for 3 years and then was dismissed, and he finished his career at Tennessee Tech. He had a really strong freshman season, started every single game in 2011, and I believe he was all SEC and led the SEC in receptions and receiving yards, or maybe it was receiving touchdowns. And in one of those years, I think it was 2011. I'm going to pull that up right here so I know for sure. Okay, here we go. In 2000, as a sophomore in 2011, he started all 12 games, led the SEC in both receptions and receiving yards. He was 2nd in the conference in touchdowns with 9. At the end of the year, he was named a first-team All-SEC selection, and he was an honorable mention All-American. So Derrick Rogers had a really, really strong season and couple of years here at Tennessee. Of course, he was dismissed and then went and finished his career at Tennessee Tech, had a cup of coffee in the NFL. He lasted his longest, I believe, with the Indianapolis Colts. Spent a little time in the CFL as well. But yeah, he played for the Colts for a couple of years. But Derek Rogers probably comes in this conversation as well. Josh Malone, I think that Josh Malone is in this conversation, but I think he just misses on the top 5. Josh Palmer, I think if you had better quarterback play in that 2020 year and really during the Garantano years, I think Josh Palmer would have been on this list, but he does not make this list. Denarius Moore, again, is just on the outside, and Cordero Patterson, just because he was a little bit of everything, is going to be excluded from this list. But as you can tell, I put in some time and research into this. I think the top 5 wide receivers, and I'll order them right now. Number 1, Justin Hunter. Number 2 is Jalin Hyatt. Number 3 is Jauan Jennings. Number 4 is Cedric Tillman. Number 5 is Derek Rogers since the year 2010. Let me know if you agree with that. It was fun to kind of go down that rabbit hole there, and I appreciate you, Matt, for sending me down that rabbit hole. But that was fun. Who do you think are the top 5 wide receivers since the year 2010? Mine are, again, number 1, Justin Hunter. 2, Jalin Hyatt. 3, Jauan Jennings. 4, Cedric Tillman. 5, Derek Rogers. I leave out Josh Malone, Josh Palmer, Denarius Moore, and Cordell Patterson. Am I completely missing somebody that I'm not even thinking of right now? I mean, Brew's not in that conversation. Squirrel's not in that conversation yet. I mean, maybe before it's all said and done, Mike Matthews will be. I don't know. But let me know if I'm forgetting anybody else at _Caner and at Locked On Vols. Matt, great question, man. Always love the questions that inspire a segment in the month of May and June. Appreciate that for sure. Hey, when we come back, we'll get into the rest of your mailbag questions. That is what you have to look forward to as we continue on here with a Tuesday Locked On Vols. All right, we got a couple of questions here that talk about the ceiling and the floor, kind of reacting to my show from Monday, and that's fine. We'll start here with James. Got a lot of feedback from some people. Here's what James had to say. I think your range of outcome for football is way too narrow. The floor, worst case scenario, is Nico and Samson get hurt. The rebuilt secondary is ineffective, and 6 losses is easily on the table at that point. The best case scenario is undefeated. However unlikely it is possible if everything breaks right. I agree with everything you just said, and I think it's about your interpretation of what ceiling and floor is. And shout out Trouble over there on the GQ at VolQuest.com. We talked about this a little bit a couple of days ago, and it truly is about your interpretation of what the ceiling and floor is. I mean, of course, for Tennessee and literally every team in college football, if everything goes your way and every break happens your way, you go undefeated. And vice versa on the other side of things, if everything goes against you and you have injury upon injury upon injury, miss a critical field goal here, quarterback doesn't hit, get a bad officiating call here, you could go winless. I mean, sure. I mean, technically, if everything goes right for Tennessee and every other team, undefeated, national championship. If everything goes wrong, you're 0-12. I mean, sure, that's how it is. So you got to find your balance there. I'm not going to come down. I mean, I'm not going to say that I think Tennessee's talented enough to beat every team on the schedule. I don't think that will happen. So I'm not going to sit here and say, and I understand, if everything goes, I don't think that is realistic that Tennessee goes undefeated. Does not mean that I think Tennessee's bad. And again, I had one person, shout out Trouble again. I really genuinely do appreciate you listening to the show, and I appreciate the feedback. I love the feedback. That's why I bring it back on the show. He said, it sounds like you're down on this team. I didn't think anybody would come to that conclusion after listening to that segment, but I'm certainly not down on this team. I think this team's going to be fun and exciting. And I think if you go 10-2, 9-3 at worst, in my opinion, I mean, it's going to be pretty exciting. But you go 10-2, you're very much in that conversation to compete for a national championship and to be in the college football playoffs. And I think that's kind of where this team is, in my opinion. So it's about your realistic ceiling and your realistic floor. Talking to Rob Lewis on the VolQuest podcast, and I brought up Florida. He's like, well, Florida shouldn't even be in this conversation. I 100% agree with that. Tennessee is so much better than Florida. 100% better than Florida. And 1 year doesn't dictate the next. I get all that. However, Stephen A. Smith style, Tennessee doesn't beat Florida. And until I see Tennessee beat Florida consistently, when Tennessee's clearly the better team, it's not one that I'm going to pick to lose. I'm not going to pick Tennessee to lose that game, but it's one of those games I'm going to say, well, worst case scenario, you lose to Florida again. Why? Well, because it happens all the time, right? It's just kind of one of those things. So, again, James, good feedback. Trouble, great feedback. I got somebody else in here. I'll read it in a moment, but I think it's realistically your ceiling, realistically your floor, and you can obviously make it your own, because if everything goes right, you're 12-0 national champions, or 15-0, whatever it is. If everything goes wrong, you're going winless. That's just, I mean, end of the day, that's true. But anyway, James does have another Twitter Tuesday question. AJ Russell update. Yeah, well, the time of this recording, I think AJ Russell, and I wrote about this in the 321 at volquest.com on Monday. I think you're going to see AJ Russell this week. Would not shock me whatsoever if AJ Russell was pitching some point in the midweek on Tuesday against Belmont. I think that they would love to get him. And of course, all this is barring a late setback. In a perfect world, I think they would like to get him, 2 or 3 appearances before regional play. So say he pitches an inning tonight and it all goes well. Maybe you get another inning at some point over the weekend. Maybe you get 2 innings in the SEC tournament, whatever the case is. Short stints. He's not going to pitch 7 innings going 110 pitches. That's just not going to happen. They can use him in a variety of different roles. Come in, not his first outing, but he can come in and close a ball game. He can come in middle relief in a tight situation. He can open a game, pitch the first couple innings. But AJ Russell's very, very near, and I would call him probable to see the mound at some point this week. He's already thrown 2 successful bullpens, and he threw live BP to stand-in. That's when this is over the weekend in Nashville. When a Tennessee batter would stand in there. He didn't swing, but it was a stand in there, and he threw live BP to him. So he is very, very close. Very, very close. Again, wouldn't shock me at all to see AJ Russell pitch tonight, and we'll see how that goes. And man, again, what a September call up for Tennessee if all that goes well. Let's go to Corey. It's another one on ceiling and floor. Ceiling's 12-0. Has to be 12-0. Tennessee has a chance to win every single ball game. A lot would have to happen to make it happen, but there's a chance, so the ceiling has to be 12-0. The floor is 8-4. With how last season went with Joe Milton's extremely hard to think that the team could bottom that. Outside of 3 opponents, you're really stretching for the 4th anyway. Enjoy the pod, Caner. Hey, Corey, appreciate it as always. Thanks so much for listening. Yeah, again, saying, Tennessee has a chance to beat every single team, so the ceiling has to be 12-0. But again, the flip side, it would be 0-12, right? I'm with you, though. My floor is 8-4. If everything goes wrong, I don't see Tennessee being worse at 8-4. And guys, again, I understand last season was disappointing, and I'm not trying to carry water for Joe Milton, but look at where we are as a fan base. Devastated, distraught, unacceptable following an 8-4 regular season. And I agree, that's not the standard. Should be much better. Should be better. But man, you would pay so much money to have an 8-4 season for so many of those years over the last 10, 15 years since Fulmer, right? Right? I mean, it's just, credit Josh Heupel and his staff, because we are just beside ourselves that Tennessee was 8-4 last year. That just goes to show you how healthy the program is and how good things are with Josh Heupel. Corey, appreciate it as always, man. Thanks so much. We'll go to Jared. Jared says, can you do a show where you revisit all the bowl predictions from last season that failed or hit? Also, could you do what Josh Pate does and with his bowl predictions for UT only, rate them 1 through 10, then analyze them after the season? Would love for you to do this and it would get us through the offseason. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little too late for that from last year, but going into this season, when I do bowl predictions, I will make sure to copy these down and file them separately so we can go back and visit them in December or January or whatever. That is something fun to do. I remember 2 of the bold takes that I had last year. I said Dont'e Thornton was going to be great. Last year, that wasn't it, so I missed on that one. And I think I said that, again, that's why I need to write these down. I think I said that Tennessee's running game would be like top 2 in the SEC. Well, that one hit. Tennessee was one of the best rushing teams, not only in the SEC, but the nation. So, yeah, going into next season, I will 100% write down my bowl takes, and we'll come back and revisit them and have some fun with it. Always got to laugh at yourself when you're wrong. I certainly do that a lot as well. Aaron says, hey, Eric, as of right now, who do you predict has more of a breakout year, Brazel or Thornton? Also, do you think if Sampson stays healthy, he could have a 1,000-yard year? I know he had some breakaway runs last year, and being RB1, I see a Wright type year for him personally. That would be great. I also think that Wright benefited from always being fresh. How much will Sampson benefit from that with the unknowns behind him? We'll have to see. I will say Thornton is the one that will have more of a breakout year just from all the reasons I mentioned earlier. Second year in the system. He's healthy. He had a great spring. He's confident. Doesn't mean Brazel had a bad spring because he didn't. Doesn't mean that Brazel will have a bad year coming up. I'm just saying I think there's some more comfortability. Say that again. Comfortability with Thornton in the offense right now compared to Brazel, and that's okay. So I will pick Thornton for that. And then finally, the last one goes to my guy, Robo22. Tuesday question. I know it's baseball, but to us fans, it sure seems like the team batting average, hits, doubles, runs, home runs, or hits with runners in scoring position, home runs, all seem to have dropped over the last 10 games. Can you look and see if the numbers also reflect what we think and what we've seen from this offense? Just the last 10 games or so since Kentucky. Appreciate it. Always enjoy your show. Hashtag every day. Rob, appreciate you, man. I see you on VolQuest too. You're the man. Yeah, I mean, he's right. Like, sometimes it's just baseball. I mean, Tennessee's offense is still dangerous, but talking about since that Kentucky series, you had the Missouri series where in game 1 against Missouri, Tennessee hit 6 home runs. And then you went on a 2-game stretch where you didn't hit any home runs, and Tennessee scored a combined 6 runs. Still swept the Tigers, but the offense kind of went away in games 2 and 3. Scored 9 runs and a loss to Lipscomb in that midweek game coming off that series. Did hit a home run. Billy Amick hit a home run there in the 9th inning of that game. Florida series, Tennessee won that series 2-1, but in game 3, Tennessee scored 11 runs in one of those innings and hit 3 home runs in the ball game. Okay. The offense was non-existent in game 3 at Vanderbilt in the series win in the state capitol, which shut out for the first time this year, held to only 3 hits. That's the fewest this season and the fewest since the SEC tournament loss to Texas A&M, where Tennessee was held to 1 hit last year in Hoover. But in the 2 games prior, Tennessee combined for 15 runs, and Tennessee hit not 1 but 2 two-run home runs in game 1. I think that was the 8th inning. Cannon Peebles and Kavaris Tears, and Christian Moore hit a home run in both those games. So my point is, it's not as bad as it seems. But I do recognize that the offense has kind of been hit or miss a little bit compared to what it was at the beginning of the season. And again, I know people hate when I say this, but a lot of times that's just baseball. That's just the nature of the game. The ball is tough to you sometimes. You can be so dominant one day and not anywhere close to that the next day. It's not football. It's not basketball. This is baseball. It's a different sport. But I will say it's not as bad as it seems. As far as some individual stats, the home runs have been down, okay, since the Kentucky series. You are right. Tennessee has gone from leading the nation to 3rd place and 2nd in Power 5 behind Georgia. Season home runs, 131, trailing 2 to Georgia and 9 to Austin Peay. Austin Peay's having an incredible season at the plate there in the mid-major. The doubles are down as well. But I think a big reason of that is because Blake Burke is not hitting as many doubles here in the last couple of weeks. Blake Burke was leading the nation with 21 doubles at one point in time a couple of weeks ago. He's only hit 1 double in like the last 2 weeks. And so because Blake Burke's double pace had just slowed, Tennessee's doubles overall have slowed down as well. I don't have specifics on runners in scoring position. I don't know how to go in there from that series to where they are now. But at the end of the day, again, I'll just kind of circle back to this. Tennessee is, in those 3 weekend series since Kentucky, Tennessee is 7-2. Tennessee's finding ways to win. Tennessee's getting good pitching. And there's still been some offensive blow-ups in some of those games as well. So Tennessee's offense is fine, in my opinion. It's never as bad as it seems. But Tennessee baseball is still the number 1 ranked team in the country. It's doing all right. Roba, appreciate the question, man. Appreciate all of you guys for listening to us here on Locked On Vols, making this your first listen each and every day. Thanks so much for sending in your Twitter Tuesday questions. Mailbag edition of the show each and every Tuesday right here on Locked On Vols. We'll get into Josh Ward, get his thoughts on Tennessee baseball and everything else about the 2024 and 25 SEC basketball schedule was released yesterday. I'll ask him about that as well. All that and more whatever the hit news of the day is for Tennessee Volunteers Athletics. We'll ask Josh Ward on Ward Wednesday coming up on tomorrow's show. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll do it again tomorrow. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, everybody. This is Locked On Vols.